Hey guys, Josh from soccerreviewsforyou.com, bringing you my thoughts and initial impressions of the brand new Nike Hypervenom Phantom 3. Now, the first question that I always get whenever a new model comes out or gets unveiled is, will you be reviewing them? I'm almost 2,000 videos into this whole YouTube thing with reviewing pretty much every soccer shoe that comes out, so I think it's pretty safe to assume that yes, I will be bringing in the Phantom 3 for review. When will that be? In the Nike press release, they said January 30th is when this shoe will be available. What does that actually mean though? It doesn't mean a whole lot in terms of when the availability will actually be. January 30th could just be a pre-order date, meaning that on January 30th, you'll be able to purchase the shoes in a pre-order form, and then they'll show up whenever the stores or Nike themselves actually receive their stock. That could be right on January 30th. That could be a month from January 30th. As of right now, we just don't know. So just know I will be reviewing them, and I will be reviewing them as soon as I can possibly get a pair. So stay tuned to the channel, stay tuned to my social media for updates on when that will be. But like I said, I can assure you that the second that I get them is the second that a video will get posted. Now, pricing, this is something that they also did not mention in the press release. We don't really know. I would anticipate for the mid-cut variation of the shoe to be around $300, the same as the Obra 2 and the Superfly 5. I don't see it being more. I don't see it being too much less if it does end up being maintained at $275. But given the technologies in the shoes and given the equivalence of what Nike has available right now, I think $300 is a pretty safe bet. With that being said, they have also said that there's going to be a low-cut variation of the shoe. They've actually shown it in the press release. The name structure, again, a little bit unclear at this point. I believe it's going to be Phantom 3 DF for the mid-cut model and then Phantom 3 for the low-cut version. So it's not going to be Phantom and Finish anymore like we saw with the Hypervenom Phantom 2 and obviously the Hypervenom Finish. So you're going to get that Flyknit upper, the same basic structure to the shoe for both models, just that one's going to be low-cut and one's going to have a collar. So this is something that I know a lot of people have been asking for, and I would anticipate the low-cut model costing a little bit less. If they go by the same pricing structure that we see with their takedown models that are available in low-cut and mid-cut variations, my guess would be $300 retail for the Phantom 3 and $260 or so for the low-cut variation of the Phantom 3. But again, that's just a guess at this point in time. So in regards to the actual changes they've made to the shoe, it's pretty much a complete redesign. The only basic thing that stays the same is it looks like they've maintained the same general silhouette and shape to the actual upper itself. It has the same off-centered lacing system with the laces being pushed slightly to the lateral side. And like I said, for the Phantom 2, the Phantom 3, you still do maintain a mid-cut design like we saw on the Phantom 2, at least on one of the variations. Everything else though is completely different. So you can see this time around they've gone for a full Flyknit upper, which I think is a very interesting choice. This is something we obviously have not seen before from the Hypervenom line. The original Phantom 1 really had its success because of that Nike skin upper that it had, the honeycomb base mesh. They didn't really go with that initially with the Phantom 2, but then that eventually became what the Phantom 2 ended up being, kind of just an improvement over that original Phantom 1. But with the Phantom 3, they've gone completely unique here. They've scrapped that whole honeycomb mesh-based synthetic, and they've gone for a Flyknit base, which I'm actually very, very excited about because this particular Flyknit structure does look a fair bit different than the other two lines from Nike, the Superfly and the Obra, which, again, I always like to see something new, and I think Flyknit is one of those materials that, as far as knitted structures go, Nike is way ahead of the game in comparison to Adidas and Puma with their knitted applications. So I think that the potential for this being a very, very good upper is quite high. So with that upper, you're going to find that there are these little kind of square rectangular textures or little applications on top. They're bumps, it's added texturing to the upper. In the strike zone of the shoe, those are actually filled in with a material called Poron. It is a foam type material. You've seen it from Nike before. You've seen it from other brands as well. It's not a foam that's proprietary to Nike. It's not like Lunarlon, for example. This is a foam material that they actually have to buy from the Poron brand. That's why it is called Poron across the board. So please keep that in mind. But basically what Poron is, usually used as a protective foam, is it's also a rate dependent foam, meaning that if you have it right here in a slab and you touch it and you push it slowly, it's gonna feel very soft and very squishy. But if you hit it really hard, it has this kind of hardening effect, if that makes any sense, meaning that the type of impact that it has against the foam is how that foam will actually react differently. Softer impacts, it's going to be more squishy. Harder impacts, it's going to be a little bit firmer. So they implemented this type of foam through the strike zone on the shoe, basically that big bone on top of your foot. Those are filled in with 2 millimeters of Poron foam. So a very, very thin layer, which automatically, because you have foam in an upper, people are going to want to compare this to the Evo Power line, be it the Evo Power 1, 1.2, 1.3, or the Evo Power Vigor one, the latest one. But to me, this does look like it's going to be quite a bit different in regards to feel. Because of the type of foam and because of the thickness of the foam. I still expect this shoe to have a thinner sensation in general, but again, because of the type of foam that they've used, I'm really curious to see how it is actually going to feel, because in comparison to the Evo Powers, where they use a material called AccuFoam, it is their own material, that's a much softer, much squishier material across the board, no matter what type of contact is being made. Where, like I said, this Poron foam they're using, it's much thinner than what we've seen in terms of AccuFoam applications, and it also is rate dependent according to Nike. So it's something that I think is going to have a very interesting impact on what the experience is going to be like with this particular shoe. You're also going to notice that those little kind of raised applications across the entire upper are across the entire upper, but only the parts in the strike zone are actually filled in with Poron foam. So keep that in mind. The rest of them are just actually raised texturing. It's a 3D texturing, kind of like what we see on the upper of the Obra 2 right now, but obviously with a different pattern. And I expect that, because of it being a different pattern, to have a different feel in general. So really, really curious to try this out. But I think it is something that does look quite good. You still have the Nike skin covering, you still maintain ACC all conditions control. The off-center lacing system is attached to the upper itself by way of actual flywire cables. So unlike the Phantom 2 and its mid-cut variation, this is entirely a one-piece Flyknit enclosure for your foot, which is pretty interesting. And the flywire cables run from the base of the sole into the lacing system, but they actually exit from the Flyknit upper and create lace loops basically for the laces to attach to the shoe. So something a little bit different in terms of what we've seen from Nike on a soccer cleat, but stuff that we have seen before in Nike's other lineups in terms of how you can lace up a shoe. Am I worried about the exposure of those Flyknit cables being perhaps a durability concern? Not necessarily, just because I've seen Nike do this so many times before leading up to the Phantom 3, but it is something that I know some people will be concerned about. And I guess if you were to be left loose, if you were to run around in the shoes with the laces untied and have those little kind of flywire cables sticking up, not being pressed against the upper like they would be once they're laced, there is potential for those to snag on other people's cleats and potentially have issues with them. But again, as long as you're wearing them properly with the laces tied, I don't really foresee there being any major issues in regards to that being a durability concern for the shoe. Moving on to the rear, obviously you do have a mid-cut and a low-cut variation. The low-cut appears to be pretty self-explanatory. It looks like almost exactly like what we got on the Phantom 2, as well as the finish, as the Phantom 1 and the finish, sorry. So it's not like a low-cut kind of lowered collar like we see Cristiano Ronaldo having his modified variation of the Superfly 5. This is just a standard low-cut construction, which I think is a good choice long-term anyways, especially in regards to the comfort and fit of the shoe. The mid-cut variation, on the other hand, does see a revamp to the collar itself, where again, they're kind of taking a little bit from what we got from the Obra line, and that it does have a little bit more shape to it. It's not just a straight tube cut straight across the top. You're gonna find that the medial side of the collar is raised 10 millimeters higher than the lateral side. 10 millimeters, not very much, but there definitely is a difference that is visible. Are you actually gonna be able to feel that though when you're wearing it? Not necessarily. The collar is one of those things that it's more of a marketing gimmick as opposed to a tangible performance feature. It's just something that a lot of people like the look of, and they made it look a little bit different here on the Phantom 3, so you can't really fault them for that. Internally, it does have a Nike grip application to the surface of the liner on the actual insole itself, so that's supposed to be somewhat of an internal grip element for your actual foot to be held in the shoe, and of course the sock to grip the insole itself. So that's something that I'm really excited about. That could be a pretty interesting feature, although we have seen stuff like this from other brands in the past. Mizuno is a notable one, and it is a technology that, if done properly, can actually be pretty effective in terms of enhancing the responsiveness or just the responsive sensation that a shoe can provide. So I think that's a pretty interesting new technology that we do see in the Phantom 3. And then moving on to the sole plate does feature a combination of P-backs. more towards the front, and then a nylon material more towards the back. So flexible at the front, stiffer towards the midfoot heel area. Interested to see how that's going to play out, because that is a completely different redesign in comparison to the first 2 generations of Hypervenom. The stud pattern itself does kind of have this T90 vibe to me. Obviously the studs on the lateral side mimic the chevron studs we see on the current generation of Mercurials, and then you have these kind of hexagon shaped studs on the medial side. They're basically rounded studs, if we're completely honest with ourselves, in terms of how they're actually going to feel. But you have this bladed kind of conical stud hybrid going on that, again, reminds me a lot of something that could be on a T90 model, being that the Hypervenom line did take over the T90s. Does that relate to the design of this shoe at all? Probably not, but that's just kind of my first initial thoughts when I saw it, is that it looks kind of like something you'd see on a T90, and I'm pretty optimistic for how it's going to perform. Nike tends to do a pretty good job with their stud pattern, so I expect this to work quite well. And again, it's not really straying too far away from what we've seen from the brand in the past. And then finally, the other kind of little piece of information that you're going to find in the actual press release is the fact that Nike have stated that this new Phantom 3 is supposed to be 17% lighter than the Phantom 2, its predecessor. So that's something that's pretty interesting. How did they make it lighter? I assume the majority of the weight savings are going to be in the sole plate construction itself. But again, until I get the shoes in my hand, it's really, really difficult to predict where exactly they shave the weight and how thin that Flyknit upper actually is. I anticipate it being not quite as thin as what you'll find from the Superfly, but again, really the thing with Flyknit, I know that they have 3 top-end Flyknit models, and a lot of people probably assume because it's the same material, it's going to have the same feel. The beauty of Flyknit is it allows them to engineer every square millimeter of the shoe. They can decide exactly how the thickness is going to be, exactly what texture it's going to have, exactly what shape that section of the upper is going to have. And when you engineer that across an entire upper, it really does mean that you can engineer exactly the way you want that shoe to feel. So again, despite the Obra, the Superfly, and the Phantom 3 all having full Flyknit uppers, the end result in regards to feel is actually quite different from line to line. Of course, I can't comment firsthand on how the Phantom 3 feels, but like I said, based on the differences in terms of feel that you get from the Superfly and the Obra line, both with the first and second generation Flyknit models, I anticipate this having its own pretty unique feel as well. So overall, very excited about these. The look, that's something that I'm still kind of iffy on, but everyone's going to have their own opinion with that. Not really, in my opinion, a good way to judge a shoe. Yes, the looks of the shoe are important, but when we're talking about a performance product, especially myself being a product reviewer, I don't really try to focus too much on the look. I try to focus more so on the fit, feel, and general performance characteristics of that particular shoe. So overall, very excited to try these out. Like I mentioned at the start, not sure when I'm going to be getting them, but as soon as I do, you can anticipate a video to go up on the channel. If you have any questions regarding this shoe, leave them down below in the comments and I'll try my best to answer them. And if you do have any kind of comments on the Phantom 3 yourself, I'd be really kind of excited to hear those opinions of the shoe down below in the comment section as well. If you enjoyed today's video, found it helpful and informative, be sure to support it with a like. Subscribe if you haven't already for daily videos on all the latest and greatest soccer gear. You can find all of my social media information linked down below in the description as well. And other than that, guys, hope you enjoyed today's video. And as always, thanks for watching.